is an NEU rep from Stockport, but she's also on the national executive of the NEU. So she can bring us completely up to date with what the NEU exec has been saying. So over to you, Dawn.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me back. First, I'd like to start the meeting just with a massive thank you for every key worker that we're aware of who worked so much and so hard over these last few months. It's now rolling into years, because the situation is not improving, it's getting worse, and I doubt we're aware of anybody who has not been touched by a loss through this awful condition. And it's really important that the NEU has sort of stepped up because the situation is getting worse. We had an emergency national executive meeting on Saturday, where we looked at the evidence and looked at how that timeline has progressed quite recently over the last month. The new COVID strain is around about 50%, 70% more contagious. That's been demonstrated, and spreads easier, much more amongst younger people, and that's been reported across our hospitals. And those rapidly increased infection rates are basically going to be overwhelming our NHS, that we need to be mindful of. We looked at the data as well in that meeting on Saturday, and the ONS data from December showed that secondary age and primary age children had the highest COVID rates of all age groups. And that has been, we've always been, throughout this period, since we went into the original first lockdown, the National Education Union has always said, look at the science, where's the science? And the official SAGE group, and indeed the Indie SAGE, have always said over the last month that they wanted schools to close for this month, and that's what we called for before the Christmas holidays, and it's what we've been forced to do again after it. But the government hasn't obviously done it, despite requests to release that SAGE advice and the modelling of the impact. And even if you look at the SAGE advice, it says that they are clear that unless schools are closed, that R rate will not reduce below 1. So we're in the position now, currently, or to 8 o'clock or thereafter, we don't know, where the government is requiring most schools, other than the ones around London and South East, to be fully open from this week. But the criteria isn't open, transparent. We've got so many questions about who should be in school and who should not be in school. There's been no further Department for Education mitigation about measures for primary schools. They've not changed, so there's no additional PPE. Social distance is still impossible in the classrooms, and we have obviously historically overcrowded classrooms. We've got so many questions from our members, particularly those who are clinically vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, who are still expected to attend the workplace. But we keep constantly requesting the government to publish the data. And that's unfortunately why it's been over the last weekend where we've had to make these very short notice decisions to push for the closure of schools, because the government has not come forthcoming with the data. As we mentioned, I work in a secondary school, and we're supposed to have opening delayed for 2 weeks to prepare for mass testing. I mean, that's a welcome move, but it's a huge operational and resources challenging ground testing. But also, some of those tests have only arrived today in our schools. So how can schools organise that? Now, whatever happens with Boris Johnson's announcement, if we do go into lockdown with school closures included, it's not a victory. We cannot sit there in all consciousness call it a victory for the National Education Union, because we want our schools to be open. We want to provide education, but ultimately we want safe schools. But it's because of the vacuum of leadership within the government that we've had to step up, because of the lack of understanding about how schools operate, the total disregard to how schools operate and towards the leadership of those schools, and the vacuum of decisions makings. I've been extraordinarily proud of the National Education Union. I've always been particularly proud of it, but over these last few days, we have stepped up into that vacuum of leadership, and we've been the ones to speak up and speak out. Our union strategy has been informed by the science that we've been pushing for. Now, we want to work with the government to plan how schools should open safely. And we do have a petition that's available on our website that I hope we can share in the chat, to how we can open our schools safely for the whole community. And we want to work with parents, governors, grandparents, MPs, councillors, whoever you are, about how we can open it. So I hope, I'll stop there, but I hope we can share that petition in the chat so people can sign that, because that's still valid until we get the go ahead.
Right, thank you very much, Dawn, for giving us all that information. And yes, if you put it in the chat, then people can sign the petition who haven't. Now, our next speaker, who is due to be, is Karen Reissmann, but I don't think she is here yet. So she's obviously got held up. So I shall go on to our speaker after her, who is Lisa Bentley, who is a parent from Wigan. So I think she is here. Yes. So Lisa, I have you down as Lisa Bentley, but you're down there as Lisa Diaz. So I got the wrong surname for you. No, I haven't. Right. Well, I'm very glad to welcome Lisa. So over to you. Can you unmute yourself, or can somebody else?
Is that done it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you for having me. I mean, I just want to say on behalf of parents, thank you to not just the teachers, but the TAs and all the staff who work within the schools. What you do, it looks like it's coming down to the unions to save us from the pandemic, like the previous speaker said about the vacuum of leadership. Schools aren't safe. I mean, myself, my children haven't been back in school since March, and I've received threats of fines, prosecution, 3 months jail sentence, just for keeping my kids safe during a pandemic. It's been incredibly stressful, but it's been blatantly obvious that the government has never intended to follow the science, and it continues now, and it's come to a point where the virus is mutating. It's more prevalent in children in primary and secondary than any other age group. So it's an absolute no-brainer what you're doing. You have to do it. And the vast majority of parents I know, for example, I've set up a group called PACS, which is Parents Against COVID in Schools, and I'm part of another movement as well. I'll share the Twitter handle later on the group, which is Safe Red for All. And we've got members all over the UK, from Southampton to Newcastle, who are absolutely crying out for safer schools, because it's not just the teachers that are becoming cannon fodder, it's our kids. There was an 8-year-old child who died 3 days ago. It's completely inhumane and unacceptable. And you can't please all people all the time. So you're going to get parents who, I've seen some absolute bile spilled out over on Facebook saying, teachers are cowards. It's all nonsense. You can't please all people all the time, but what you've got to do, you're not cannon fodder, you've got to protect yourselves, and you're not asking for the earth. There is no other workplace whereby you will be expected to be in an 8x8 space. I'll take this off, my dad's on the other side of the room. An 8x8 space with 32 other bodies, with no social distancing and no PPE and no ventilation, the window slightly ajar. But you can't beat an airborne virus by sanitizing your hands and wiping down desks. And that you're faced in put in this situation, it's got to, and hopefully, I think, Nicola Sturgeon's taken the lead, so our English First Minister will follow and announce that schools will be shut. But as Dawn said previously, it's not the end of the battle, because then when they reopen again, we have to ensure, for the safety of the pupils and the teaching staff, that the independent SAGE recommendations are implicated, as Dawn previously said. So yeah, just to let you know, the feeling within my school in Wigan, my primary school, is looking at the parents groups. I'd say there's a shift in attitude overall. People are more worried. People are, people who I've like I said, I've kept my kids off, but there's other ones who had sent him in who said, not this time, my kids will be staying off. So there is a shift in the mood. And yeah, just to say, send solidarity and say thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lisa. That was great. And it's wonderful to have a parent's view as well. I think that's really, really important. And I'm glad to say that Karen is now with us. And so our next speaker is Karen Reissmann, who is an NHS nurse, and she's also on the Unison National Executive Committee. Over to you, Karen. I think you need to unmute yourself, or can you?
Yeah, I've done it, sorry. Yeah, I mean, we're sadly back in the same place that we were in March when they wouldn't bring in lockdown, the back that we're positioned that we were in at half term last year when they wouldn't bring in lockdown, and we're back in the position now where the scientists have been telling them all along for the last since just before Christmas that we need a lockdown, that the escalation has gone so far, and time again the government waits until the very, very last moment and then goes a bit further before they bring in a lockdown. And each time the consequence of that is that people die. The first time, had they brought in the lockdown just 1 week earlier, when the scientists were recommending it, 20,000 people who are now dead, whose families are mourning, would be alive today, and a whole load more people would be well who are now suffering from long COVID. And that's the consequences of the decisions that they make. And sadly, this pandemic is going to be the worst. Out of this wave of it is going to be the worst. Independent Sage said on Thursday last week that we're no longer dealing with the same pandemic, because although it's got the same symptoms, the symptoms are not worse, it has a much higher level of infectiousness. It is much easier to pass it on. There is a higher concentration of virus in people who are infected, and therefore as they breathe and they breathe out, there is a higher amount that they breathe out, and therefore the chance of people picking it up is higher. You congregate a lot of people in a small space and they're all breathing, and if one of them is breathing the virus out, the others are breathing the virus in, and the ability to pick that up is much easier. And the surgical masks are not sufficient to, I mean, they will have some effect, but they are not sufficient to block that if you're in a confined space, you're close to people. And in a way, the schools that they have said they're going to keep open, primary schools, you cannot make children sit still when they're 5, 6, 7, 8. It is an impossible task to do. You don't want to be able to do it. What sort of children would you have if that was what you wanted to do to them? So the idea that he hasn't, given that he's let it escalate to this stage, that they haven't done anything to put a stop to it is an absolute disgrace. And really, I want to say thank you to the parents and to the teachers, particularly the NEU, whose members and leaders have fought incredibly hard to do the job that our government is not doing, which is to protect people. Because it isn't just school students and it isn't just school workers who will be affected by this. It's the families that they will bring that infection back to and the communities in which they live. And given how infectious it is, it will run through us. And just to give an example, it is much worse in the south because they have a higher level of the new variant than we do, and that's running rampant. But we have quite a high level that is growing really quickly. So we will know what's coming. We're not stupid. We know what's coming. In the south, in London, they've got a situation where they haven't got enough CPAP machines, which are the machines that force air into you when you can't breathe. So they're having to say, you're a little bit better. Can we take yours off you because we've got somebody who's a little bit worse? Literally sharing. In some hospitals, the demand for extra oxygen, really high pressure top level oxygen, is meaning some of the oxygen supplies in hospitals are at breaking point, and they're having to fit new supplies because we have never given that many patients that amount of oxygen before. NHS was a mess before COVID started, and in a way, the pandemic is making that clear. We are not in a position in Britain to be able to cope. We need to stop people getting infected, because now the people who are getting infected who need hospitalisation will be, if they're lucky, queuing outside A&E. If they're unlucky, they're waiting for the ambulance to come. And that is a horrific position when you can't breathe and you risk dying to be in. And we need to stop it. And that's why a lockdown involving schools is necessary. But we also need to do the things that mean that that doesn't happen. And that means taking up the questions, which I'm sure Dawn covered, about what schools could look like if we were actually putting the money and the resources into making it happen. Taking over the empty buildings so that we can have schools sort of in much bigger classrooms, so that we have smaller bubbles rather than the bubbles that we have at the moment. But the last thing I want to say is that we have to fight. We have to do something about it. We did a little banner drop in Manchester in Hume this morning, and we got front page evening news because we tweeted it to the MEN news desk, which I would recommend, because I'm sure it's difficult for journalists to get stories. If you want a story in, get a nice picture and tweet it to them, and they'll just put it on their front page without even crediting you, which I think is a bit mean. But also we need to be doing the sort of, you know, maybe the collective small local protest, but all at the same time, like we did when we all clapped outside our houses. But maybe get sort of, you know, in each locality, we need to have small protests that are safe, that we can keep safe. We need to look at cavalcades, because, to be honest, unless we start to fight to take control, to do the things that we need to do, they might bring in a lockdown at 8 o'clock, but at the end of the lockdown, when the infection rates have gone down, they will not have put in place the things that will stop it coming back again, and more people will die all over again. It is horrific what's happening. It is not necessary. There are countries whose death rates are less than 50, who are much, much poorer than us, because they've done the right thing. We're doing the wrong things. We, the government, are doing the wrong things. We, the people, have to do the right things.
Right, that was brilliant, Karen, and that drop, that banner drop was just great. It was wonderful to look on the website and see it there at the top of the Manchester Evening News. I'm sure it was really inspiring, and you're so right about what you said about the NEU and all that information about the hospitals as well. It's frightening. I find it really frightening. So our next speaker, I'm very glad to welcome back John Morgan, who is the NEU Manchester Divisional Secretary. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that most people on this call tonight are not National Conservative voters. But it's one thing to dislike the politics of the Conservative Party, and it's a completely different matter to suddenly realise that they are absolutely incompetent. And that is very, very dangerous when we're in a national crisis. There has been U-turn after U-turn. There has been 12-hour decision after 12-hour decision, leaving school leadership no time whatsoever to implement changes. This has caused absolute chaos, and I would like to applaud all my colleagues, whether they are teaching assistants or head teachers or principals or classroom teachers across the country, who have managed to try and make some sense out of what's happened over the last 9 or 10 months. We were arguing at Christmas as a union that people should be able to break up just a little bit early for Christmas and do online learning, and that would prevent children taking the virus home to their families at Christmas and potentially giving it to elderly relatives. A number of multi-academy trusts and London boroughs were actually threatened by regional school commissioners and the DfE with legal action and financial penalties, and they were told that they couldn't do that. Immediately at the end of Christmas, we get the situation where London boroughs are being told, oh, some of you are going to shut. Oh, no, actually, all of you are all going to shut. You're all going to go on online learning. It's all okay now because everything's going to hell. So we are really dealing with a government that has lost control. We understandably have seen a 36% increase across Greater Manchester in the last week in infections, which is very frightening. This is just basically what we said would happen when those Christmas restrictions were relaxed. And yet Boris Johnson was on TV yesterday saying that schools are safe, send your children to school. As a result of a meeting of SAGE on the 22nd of December, we now know that they advised the government that it was unsafe to keep schools open. Therefore, this has caused part of our strategy this week, which has not been industrial action, And it's really important to note that we've used Section 44 of the 1996 Employment Rights Act to advise our members that if they feel unsafe at work, that they should not attend work. This has never, ever been done on a mass, in a mass way before, and it's groundbreaking. And I'd just like to say that there's a lot of young teachers out there who've been on the phone to me today, terrified about handing that letter into their head teachers, and have been extremely brave for standing up for themselves and their colleagues and their communities by doing it. So it's been a real effort. And as far as we know, we don't have all the data in, but by mid-afternoon, at least a third of the City of Manchester's primary schools had shifted to partial opening, and it had been a real success. Now, as we know, Peston has leaked that there might be a lockdown and schools might be closed until February, which again just brings me back to the incompetency of Boris Johnson, who yesterday encouraged parents to send their children to school, only for 24 hours later potentially to say, oh no, you're not going to be there now for several weeks. Imagine how many children may have picked up that virus today and may transmit it to elderly relatives over the next week. It's an absolute travesty. We are doing our utmost to stand up, not just for our members, but for the communities that we serve, and we will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Absolutely right there, and you're getting lots and lots of claps there. And I think that it's really difficult. I mean, when you are at work and you can take collective action all together and you're all in the same room, but when you're doing it individually, even if other people are doing it and you've not done it before, then I think you're absolutely right. It's a really brave thing to do, and we should applaud all those teachers that have done that. Our next speaker is Alex Helsby, who is a Unison member, and he's a teaching assistant in Bolton. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you. I've set a timer for myself so that I can try and do it properly. I think the last time I came on to one of these meetings, it was in the run up to June the 1st, and it was the same issue. It was Section 44, and we were talking about how lots and lots of people felt like they didn't know whether it would work. They didn't know if they could put it in. Over Christmas, I'd kind of missed how fast things had escalated, particularly in London. But on Saturday, the head teacher sent us a email with a graph showing that things were getting better and that work was safe, and that, you know, would follow the same procedures. Now, I'm not criticizing the head teacher. He's done a lot to make sure he can make it safe. But the truth is that there was no way that it could be safe for us to come back, no matter what we did, so soon after Christmas, with the numbers in the way they are. I wanted to do something, but I didn't really know what to do, really, because in such a short period of time, my instinct was to arrange a meeting, get all the staff to sign the form collectively, and we'd hand it in, and we'd sort of all put it together. I was speaking to people, and a lot of the staff didn't feel confident. They didn't want to be that person to hand it in the note saying they weren't going to come in. They didn't want to be the person who was, you know, refusing to come in. And somebody who's on this meeting showed me something, and it was a lot of the staff were more afraid of standing up to their boss and saying to the boss that they didn't believe it was safe to come in than they were afraid of the coronavirus, because there's not really that culture of people standing up for themselves. And so in a moment of heroic idiocy, I was talked into putting it in myself. And then this morning I woke up and saw that I was the only person who'd refused to come in, and that I was basically I was working from home while the rest of the staff were going in. And I thought, they're going to hate me. All my members are going to hate me. It's going to be a disaster. But actually, there was a really positive reaction from most of the people. And I really think that anyone who's thinking about it, who's worried, if you're thinking about it, other people in your workplace are going to be thinking the exact same thing. So take the opportunity, do it. You can't be fired for handing the piece of paper in. You know, they might try and force you to redact it and not go through with it. The one thing I wanted to say was, very quickly, I know I'm running out of time, but like I said at the start, we've been in this situation before. And once again, despite the unprecedented action in relation to the supporting the Section 44s, it's still falling down to individual people the night before making a decision on whether they're going to go in. So I think collectively now we need to think about all these new members that unions have got. If they're going to be furloughed, or if they're going to be not furloughed, sorry, if we're going to be on a rota system we need to make sure that all of these members are given health and safety training so that when the schools reopen, in the run up to them being reopened, they're already health and safety reps. I've got my thing clicking to say I've gone over time. And we need to work out a way so that there's a collective response so that next time when the Tories say, oh, on the 5th of April, the schools are reopening, it's not the case that people have to make the decision the night before and that we're relying on individual bravery and that we can give each other solidarity and support so that collectively we can make the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And that was really, really good in explaining about how it just shows again how difficult it is when you're doing it sort of like on your own individually. The only time that I've ever done that, I was in a workplace and we could all walk out together, and that's so different. It's so much easier to do that. And I just wanted to say something in the chat, which a couple of people have put in, about the story from Salford. 2 staff seriously ill in hospital and several others very unwell after COVID outbreak at Salford Primary School. So that's in the Manchester Evening News today. So that's an illustration of what our speakers have just been speaking about. And now we're going to go to our last speaker, and that is Steve North, who is the branch secretary of Salford Unison. And I know that Salford Unison sent a letter to Salford Council being very concerned about the schools opening and arguing that they shouldn't be. So over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Hillary, and welcome. Nice to see everybody. Sorry I had to join you late. It's been a bit of a mad day, as I know it has been for a lot of people. I mean, I feel a huge range of emotions right now. An awful lot of pride for the response that we've seen from school workers in Salford and beyond today, who've had the guts to do what Alex has just described, who've been prepared to stand up not only for their own safety but also for the safety of their colleagues, the people that they teach, their pupils, their families. They've been prepared to stand up in very difficult circumstances and assert their rights, and I'm incredibly proud to lead a branch of people who've done that today. But at the moment, I really can't feel anything stronger than the anger that I feel. I mean, the story there has just been referred to. This isn't a game. We've got 2 people now seriously ill from working in a Salford school. A number of other staff who've got COVID. Those 2 staff who were seriously ill are in hospital. It's not a game. It's not something to mess about with. And I am so angry with the lack of support I feel that we as workers have had from the people we should expect it from. I'm not going to talk about the government. I don't expect anything from this government at all, other than cruelty and greed. But what really, really gets to me is that we could see this coming. Maybe just refer to the letter that we sent, warning that it was unsafe. And what was the response we got initially? Not only from local people who are supposed to know about these things within Salford Council. Oh yeah, no, it's safe. We feel it's safe. And then we push within our own unions, following what the NEU had done, and we get the advice coming out through Unison. Here are the Section 44 letters. Send them in. Great. They go in. So we then contact the council, and our council. So on social care or housing or a couple of other issues, they're pretty decent, to be fair. But on this, they've been absolutely terrible. I don't mind saying so. And I've told them, each of them to the face today about this, because frankly, it's disgusting. Those Section 44 letters went out, and we were receiving reports from head teachers. We were receiving reports from members that head teachers were attempting to bully staff into rescinding them, and that council officers were lending support to that approach. We haven't had a single public message of solidarity from our mayor in Salford, our deputy mayor for Children's Services, the only politician in the city who's spoken up for our members, as it always has been Rebecca Long-Daly. Nothing else from the rest of them. Absolutely shocking. Now, working with some supportive councillors, we've been able to push them to go a bit further today. We now have got something from the council making clear that our members shouldn't fear putting in those notices. But it shouldn't have to be like this. And whatever gets announced at 8 o'clock tonight, we're going to be demanding answers as a branch. We're going to be demanding answers from Salford Council as to what the hell has happened here. How have we got to this stage? People need to be held accountable for it. You can tell I'm really, really pissed off. Excuse my French. I'm incredibly proud of our members. They've shown the light. They've shown what can be achieved. That element of workers taking control of the situation and asserting their rights has been incredibly inspiring. And I have so much respect for those people at the coalface, like Alex and others who've done that. But the people who should be supporting them have let them down, and they have to answer for that. And I personally am determined, and we all should be determined to make sure that they do. So I'll leave it there.
Right, well, thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for all our speakers. They've all been brilliant.